The rain came down in steady sheets, drumming softly on the roof of Emma's small cafe. It was a typical afternoon in the quiet town, where the world moved slowly, as if time itself wanted to take a break. The cafe was warm and inviting, its walls adorned with paintings from local artists and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee hanging in the air. It was a place where regulars came for their daily dose of caffeine, and new visitors found solace in the cozy corners, escaping the chill of the outside world. Emma stood behind the counter, wiping down the counter with a rag, her eyes drifting to the clock above the door. It was nearly 2 p.m., a time when the afternoon rush usually slowed, giving her a chance to catch her breath. The cafe wasn't big, but it was hers, a little haven that she had built with her own hands. She had poured her heart and soul into this place, and though it was modest, it was her refuge. Yet, despite the warm atmosphere, there was always an underlying sense of sadness in Emma's heart, a sadness that never seemed to leave. The cafe had been her escape ever since she had lost her parents in a car accident years ago. The pain of that loss still lingered, as if it were etched into the very core of who she was. Emma had tried to move on, but she never could. Every time she looked out the window, every time she walked into her cafe, she could still feel them with her, like a ghost that never fully left. On this particular afternoon, as the rain drizzled outside, Emma's routine was interrupted by the soft chime of the doorbell. She looked up from the counter, expecting it to be one of the usual customers who had been coming in for years. But this time, the person who walked through the door was different. He was tall, with dark hair and a kind of quiet intensity in his eyes. His features were sharp, almost too perfect, like someone who had been carefully sculpted by time itself. But it was his eyes that caught Emma's attention. They were deep, almost unreadable, as if there was a whole world inside them that he was unwilling to share. He looked like he didn't belong in this small town. He looked like he had been somewhere else, somewhere far away, and had only come here to escape. He walked in, shaking the rain off his jacket and glancing around the cafe. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Emma quickly looked away, embarrassed by the sudden warmth that rose to her cheeks. She wasn't used to strangers noticing her, especially not in the way he had. "Hi," he said, his voice smooth and calm, with a touch of uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure what to say. "Can I get a coffee?" Emma nodded, still caught in the feeling of his gaze. "Sure. What kind would you like?" "Just a regular black coffee," he replied, his voice still calm, but with a hint of something Emma couldn't quite place. Sadness, maybe? Or weariness? "Coming right up," Emma said, her hands suddenly feeling too warm as she turned to prepare the coffee. She couldn't help but steal glances at him as she worked, watching him from the corner of her eye as he settled into a seat near the window. He seemed out of place here, like a shadow in a place where everything else felt light and warm. When she handed him the coffee, their fingers brushed briefly, sending a strange warmth up her arm. Emma quickly pulled her hand back, feeling a flutter in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. She forced a smile, hoping he didn't notice her nervousness. "Here you go," she said, setting a cup down in front of him. "Thanks," he said, his eyes meeting hers again, a small, almost hesitant smile tugging at the corner of his lips. For a moment, they both stood there, neither one knowing what to say next. Emma's heart was racing, and she found herself searching for something to break the silence. She had always been good at talking to people, at making them feel comfortable. But this man, this stranger, had a way of making her feel like words were suddenly too much. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "You're new around here, aren't you?" He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee before responding, "Yeah, I just moved in. I've been looking for a quiet place to get away from the noise, you know?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. He was looking for peace, she thought, just like me. "I get that," she said softly, leaning against the counter. "This town's small, but it's peaceful. People here don't rush much. Sometimes it's nice to just be." He nodded, his eyes searching her face, as if he were trying to read something that wasn't quite there. "I think I'll like it here," he said. "It's exactly what I need right now." Emma didn't know why, but she felt an overwhelming urge to tell him her story, to explain why she understood exactly how he felt. Maybe it was the way he spoke, so honest and raw, or maybe it was the way his presence seemed to fill the room with a sense of quiet longing that mirrored her own. But instead of speaking, she only smiled and nodded, hoping that he would open up more. "You live around here?" he asked, breaking the silence. Emma nodded again. "Yeah, just a few blocks away. I've lived here my whole life. It's not much, but it's home." For the next few moments, they exchanged small talk, each of them sharing little details about their lives, yet both staying carefully guarded. Emma told him about the cafe and how it had been passed down through her family, how it had been her way of holding onto a piece of the past. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. As the afternoon wore on, more customers came and went, but Emma found herself continually drawn back to the quiet man sitting near the window. There was something magnetic about him, something that kept pulling her in. She wasn't used to feeling this way, not in such a long time. She had always been careful, afraid to open her heart to anyone again, but there was something about him that made her want to take the risk. As the rain began to slow, Jake stood up, his empty coffee cup in his hand. He gave Emma a polite smile. "I should get going," he said, "but I'll be back tomorrow. Same time, if you're here." Emma's heart skipped again. "I'll be here," she said, not sure why the words came so easily. "Good," he said, and for a moment their eyes locked once more. Neither one of them spoke, but the connection between them was undeniable. As Jake left the cafe, the door closing softly behind him, Emma stood still, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know what had just happened. She didn't know if it was just a fleeting moment, something that would fade away with the passing rain, or if it was the beginning of something more. But for the first time in years, Emma felt the faintest stirrings of hope deep inside her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to be alone forever. And as the door chime jingled in the quiet cafe, Emma allowed herself the small luxury of believing that love, even after all this time, could still find its way into her life. The weeks that followed felt like a dream. Emma found herself waking up every morning with a quiet excitement she hadn't felt in years. She looked forward to each day, not because of the cafe or her usual routine, but because she knew Jake would be there, sitting by the window, sipping his coffee. He became a constant in her life, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the heart, light could still break through. Their conversations grew deeper. Emma found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, the pain of losing her parents, the fear of never being truly loved, and the way she had built walls around herself to protect her fragile heart. With Jake, she felt safe enough to peel away those layers, to let someone in, even though it terrified her. Jake, too, began to open up. Though he was always a bit guarded, there was something about Emma that made him feel like he could finally be himself. He told her about his life before coming to the small town, the city that never stopped moving, the relationships that had fallen apart, and the writing he had abandoned long ago. He spoke of the isolation he felt, despite being surrounded by people, and how he had hoped the quiet of this town would give him the peace he so desperately needed. But even in their growing closeness, there was always something unspoken between them. A shadow lingered in Jake's eyes, one that Emma couldn't quite place. It was a kind of sadness that wasn't born of grief or loss, but of something darker, more dangerous. He never spoke of his past with certainty, always careful to change the subject when it seemed too close to the surface. And Emma, out of respect for his silence, never pushed him. It wasn't until the night when the storm hit that Emma realized how deep the distance between them truly was. It was a Thursday evening, and the rain had begun to fall heavily once again. The cafe was quieter than usual, with only a few regulars sitting in their usual spots. Emma was behind the counter, lost in her thoughts, when she heard the familiar sound of the door opening. She looked up, her heart jumping in her chest, when she saw Jake standing in the doorway, drenched from the rain. His hair was soaked, and his jacket clung to his body, but it was the look in his eyes that made Emma's breath catch. There was something frantic in his gaze, something that made her stomach twist with unease. "Jake?" she asked, her voice tentative. He didn't respond at first. He just stood there, his eyes scanning the room before locking onto hers. For a moment, everything else in the cafe seemed to disappear. The world outside, the soft hum of the conversation, and even the gentle clinking of coffee cups, all of it faded away, leaving just the two of them. "Emma," he said, his voice strained, almost breathless. "I need to talk to you." His words sent a shiver down her spine. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She could feel it in the air, in the way his body was tense, in the way his hand shook slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. "Sit down," she said, her voice soft but insistent, her heart pounding in her chest. Jake nodded and made his way to the table by the window, the same spot he had sat in countless times before. Emma followed him, her movements slow, as though the weight of what was happening pressed down on her chest. When she sat across from him, she could see that his eyes were full of fear. Not the fear of someone who had been caught in a lie, or was facing something mundane, but the kind of fear that came from deep within, the kind that made the heart race and the mind spiral. "Jake, what's going on?" Emma asked, her voice a whisper, as if afraid that speaking too loudly would break the fragile tension in the air. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the table, as if holding on to something that might slip away if he didn't. "I have to leave," he said, his voice low, almost cracking. Emma's heart dropped into her stomach. "What do you mean, leave? Leave the town? Leave me?" Jake's gaze flickered to hers, his expression pained, like he was fighting with himself, trying to find the right words. "I'm in trouble, Emma. Trouble that I can't outrun anymore." He paused, his eyes clouded with regret. "I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to drag you into it. You deserve better than this." Emma felt a cold rush of fear and confusion. "Jake, what are you talking about? You're scaring me." "I've been running from my past," Jake continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I could leave it behind, thought I could start over, but I was wrong. I can't outrun them, Emma. I can't protect you from what's coming." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. "What do you mean by them?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake hesitated before speaking again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I used to be involved in something dangerous. I did things I'm not proud of. And now they're coming after me. They won't stop until they find me." Emma's head spun, trying to make sense of what he was saying. But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" Her voice cracked, the pain in her chest almost too much to bear. Jake reached across the table, taking her hand in his grip desperate. "I didn't want to bring you into this. I didn't want you to be part of my mess. But now I don't have a choice. They'll come for me, and I can't let them hurt you. Please, you have to understand." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as the weight of his words sank in. "Jake, no," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. I can't lose you." He looked at her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry, Emma. I love you. I always have. But this is something I have to face on my own. You need to stay away from me, for your own safety." The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her mind was spinning, the world around her crashing down in pieces. She had just found something worth holding on to, something that made her feel alive again, and now it was slipping away from her, like sand through her fingers. "I can't just let you go," Emma said, her voice breaking. I love you, Jake. Please don't leave me." Jake's face twisted with pain as he stood up, the decision already made in his heart. "I have no choice, Emma. I have to leave. I can't let them hurt you." He turned and walked toward the door, his movements slow, as if every step was tearing him apart. Emma watched him go, her heart shattering with each passing second. The door closed softly behind him, and Emma was left in the empty cafe, the silence louder than anything she had ever known. She didn't know how long she sat there, staring at the door, waiting for him to come back, but he never did. Days passed, and Jake never returned to the cafe. Emma waited, holding on to the hope that he would come back, that this was all just a bad dream. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, and still, there was no sign of him. The only thing left was the memory of their love, a love that was as fleeting as a summer rain, beautiful and brief. And Emma, though she had lost him, would carry that love with her forever, even as she tried to move on with the pieces of her broken heart. Because sometimes, love isn't enough to save us from this past, and sometimes the hardest part is letting go. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated with more heart-wrenching stories. Join our community where love, loss, and unforgettable moments await. Your support means the world. Thank you for being a part of this adventure.